affecting why our economy is going to be unstable or why growth is slowing or we're not performing as well. Although there are recent forecasts that have come out where they're saying that, oh no, the economy will do well in the coming year, will grow in the coming year. And, but we're seeing that, as what you're mentioning, that it's more systemic. Systemic in terms of the economic problems that have been ongoing. And then even with the political problems, it's not something, oh, it's just a little bit of infighting between a few politicians, but it's something that's also systemic. It's also very much a part of our greater or deeper problems that need to be discussed. So I think what was interesting, or if maybe you could explain more, for example, with the economy, you mentioned that, Sunny mentioned earlier that, okay, the government is now saying we need big, bold reforms, but it seems like it's more of the same things that they've been mentioning ever since the beginning of the administration, and which is also oddly familiar to what other administrations have been promoting and pushing. And then we need to, and we've actually, either IBON, people's organizations, people's movements have actually proposed what we think are actually big, bold reforms and what Sunny mentioned as being disruptive. So even though we see that bigger change is needed, what are the obstacles? Like what's like really, I mean, you kind of mentioned it, but maybe we need to like talk about it a little bit more. Like what is really preventing from these alternatives from what we said, agrarian reform, agriculture development, why is there such resistance? And where's the resistance coming from? Are the microphones for me? Sorry. Are the microphones on? Yes, either of you. Like you, Jack and Poy.
Yan. Meron na? Okay, sige. Okay. Biggest obstacle. I think maybe the biggest can occur in two levels. I think one is a failure of imagination by the leadership and economic managers. In a lot of ways, that wrong thinking about free markets are great, globalization is good, just open up, we'll become competitive. That's really captured the minds of people because in a lot of ways, our school system, our economics education system ingrains that thinking with very obsolete textbooks. And then when you rise to the ranks professionally, unless you subscribe to that same sort of thinking, you won't rise to the ranks professionally, you won't get a career path. And then that actually feeds into the thinking of politicians. So I think at one level, there's a failure of imagination because I think intellectually, there's an inability to grasp how problematic these textbook economics have been, and there's a failure to grasp what economic history around the world has shown. So I think at one level, that's quite important, and I don't want to underestimate that. But of course, there's also a political barrier. The political barrier to that is there are economic interests benefiting from the current setup. I mean, when you look at the sort of profile of the country's biggest oligarchs, the biggest capitalists, they actually benefit from the way things are operating now. They benefit because they are providing utilities and services to a service-driven economy that is reliant on foreign investment to boost itself. So if your biggest businessmen, if your biggest oligarchs are benefiting from the way things are, if they're benefiting from providing the non-tradables, but then just allowing the tradables because they don't have interest there, then actually there's no economic compulsion to develop. So I think there is a big fear among the current biggest businesses that if the Philippines adopts a national industrialization policy, that will disrupt what they've gotten accustomed to in terms of how they make money. And I think especially right now, they actually might be even more afraid to face the aftershocks of that. They might get tariff retaliation or some kind of investment retaliation, or they might get sort of some some blowback from that. Again, because the world has changed with the Trump administration being much more aggressive with its protectionist policies. There has been a strong trend for protectionist policy since 2008, 2009. So I think that sort of disruption in your accustomed ways of doing business, I think, gets in the way. So I think, yeah, intellectually, there's a failure to grasp the lessons from history, including our negative history. But politically, the economic forces that would that are so influential in the Philippines, I think will be feel that they'll be disrupted by a disruption in their accustomed economic policies.
All right. So I was following what Sunny said. It's ideologically and politically there are barriers or obstacles. But immediately I thought of this. I don't know who said this, but the Filipino, sino ba nagsabi nun? Has this culture that you backslide, and you have a revolution, and then you just you sit back again and relax, and you have people power and you sit back again and relax, right? And as I was listening to that, not really a political analyst, maybe some cultural professor. Actually, that's not the fault of the Filipino. I think what is our problem is that there is intensifying repression, or the infrastructure of repression that protects elite interests. So immediately, to answer your question, I said the obstacle now to really push for democratic changes is that the state uses repression, and this can be always a violent tool to repress any dissent or any demand for democratic reforms. And that's what we are experiencing now. But as we discussed earlier, it's still ripe to push for those changes, to push for reforms. Why? Because we have proven that violent or not, that there can be some semblance of peace or diplomacy or some NGO, civil society alliance with the state or with the government. The Filipino is still looking for a democratic change. So on one hand, while the repression is increasing, on the other hand, we also have that culture that we do not shut up.
Sorry, a bit slow. I think also to highlight, these are barriers that can be overcome. The intellectual barrier can be overcome by intellectual honesty and openness to new ideas, and just thinking beyond the textbooks and what your career path actually gives you. So I think that first barrier can quite easily be overcome. Theoretically, even the second barrier can be overcome. Business does what business does, which is make a profit. If the government had an industrialization policy, it could actually make developing Filipino industries profitable. But that's the problem. If the government doesn't have that imagination, that vision to operate the economy in a way that we industrialize, if it doesn't create the incentives for business to think beyond what they make money now, they will never do it on their own. The government has to protect the economy, the government has to support local business, the government has to support technology development and upgrading. Individual businesses will never do that. But because businesses do what businesses do, make it profitable for them to invest in industrial development. So I think even that second part that seems to be kind of passive, now we can't do anything because we're stuck in the rut, because that's the nature of the kind of business we have. Actually, the government can set the terms so that other businesses can prosper. The government can set the terms so Filipino industry can prosper. But will it have the political will and the imagination to do that? Well, I think that's another thing. Especially if the economic forces are actually in government as well.
So in light of that, while there are obstacles, but there are ways to overcome it. And then earlier, Roseby also was talking about directions, 3 directions. Like from the 3 political directions, Like one was maintaining the drift, that was just drifting, status quo, drifting downward drift. The other was the intensifying political infighting, thus contributing to even more intensified economic crisis. And third, yung disruption in terms of like people's movement or mass movement, pushing for complete change. Like in your opinion, I know, it's like which one are we more leaning to? And I know, like, what is that? Or not we. I know what we are leaning to, but like in terms of the objective situation right now, Okay.
Actually, these are directions.
Okay.
These are scenarios, and there are prerequisites to each scenario. So if you notice, 1 and 2 will be scenarios where the people's movement will not act, diba? So if you ask me, where are we? Which scenario or direction are we taking? I think it's the more active scenario where the people's struggles will push for that change. Now, and then we've been told, no, don't do that because it's going to disrupt the economy. Diba? Even impeachment. Impeachment is not yet even about people power. But if there is public pressure, then you know that impeachment will succeed, diba? Even impeachment now is just being, described by Malacanang as that's bad for the economy. And so that's when we say that, no, people power is good for the economy. Political pressure is good for the economy because as we've been talking about, as the pahabol answer by Sunny is that there should be strong state intervention. But what we're seeing here is the state really favors the elite interests. So, the sovereignty really rests in us. And that's the scenario we are seeing. That is the direction we are pushing. So, did I answer your question?
Yes, that's almost like parting shots. I'm sorry. We'll get there. We'll get there
Thank
soon.
you for
We'll come back
coming.
there. Thank you for coming today. Sorry. Do you want to add to that, Sunny, or?
No, he doesn't want to commit to the scenario.
Oh, he doesn't want to commit to the scenario yet. We have to still see the developments. Even now, you mentioned, people are focused or seeing the government going after what they call the people responsible for the corruption scandal and all that stuff. But you mentioned that BBM is also a very big part of this systemic corruption at perpetuating that. But there's a sense that you were saying that he's kind of trying to separate himself from that he's not a part of that, but actually the one that's behind trying to unveil all this. Do you think that's the sentiment of the general public, or is that something that, needs to be discussed or talked about more? And how can that be in terms of unveiling that this is not just about a few people or a few contractors? I know that you mentioned here about bureaucrat capitalism and the whole system, but what is it that we can do more, discuss more to really unveil or expose how far up this goes?
Okay. For me personally, the most frustrating thing about what happened last year is it showed how cynical the government is about us. When President Marcos came out with the Mahiya naman kayo statement in the State of the Nation address, that was very clearly meant to portray himself as a reformer. Now, I think it was so deeply cynical because we can't forget that he had been on top of 3 consecutive budgets. And as Rosby mentioned, those 3 consecutive budgets literally had trillions of pesos in unprogrammed appropriations, trillions of pesos in infrastructure funds, and almost 1 trillion pesos in flood control projects. When you're talking about roughly 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 to 5 trillion pesos in funds being dispersed by the government, that's not an aberration. You need to use the government machinery to do that. So clearly, pork barrel funds were dispensed over the last 23 to 2025 budgets as a matter of policy. And that matter of policy was so brazenly put in the BBM formula of the DPWH. And that implementation of that policy, that's not going to happen. You're not going to be able to dispense hundreds of billions in pork barrel under the table. It was a matter of policy. It used government mechanisms. So when even the budget secretary preemptively resigned as to prevent that thread being pulled even more. I think that's so important to grasp because it's so cynical for the administration to try to control the narrative, to give us a few small and maybe medium-sized fish, and then let our anger subside, and then maintain its centralized control over pork barrel to carry it through until 2028. So I think it's so important right now. Honestly, everyone's so angry at the Dutertes. We should be. We're so angry at the human rights violations, the violence, the thievery under the last administration. That's all true. But this administration, the numbers will show that massive increase in official pork corruption-tainted funds that spiked in 2023 and 2024, only slightly moderate in 2025. That was a matter of policy by the Marcos administration. So between the two, who's actually more deserving of being held to account? We'd argue right now, it's so important to reframe the problem. If we reframe the problem as we have to see, can the political system reform itself from within? Can the political system reform itself from within with the pressure from the outside? If it's just Sara Duterte being impeached, that's reducing the impeachment to the factional squabble between the Marcos dynasty and the Duterte dynasty for 2028. But if we impeach the president, and there are very serious allegations, we don't know if it's going to be docketed and then taken up because the strategy in Congress right now is to kill the legitimate impeachment complaints. But it's so much more important because if you actually want any shred of thinking that it is possible to reform the system, it's not going to happen with impeachment and conviction of Sara Duterte. All that will prove is that the president's control remains so overpowering that he can wield his power over the House and the Senate to seal a conviction. But look at it the other way. If we get a conviction of the president, what does that show? That shows that the government's anti-corruption agencies are functioning and not built to the president. Because the DOJ can investigate, the NBI can investigate, AMLC can investigate, the ombudsman can investigate. If all these investigations produce evidence and reports of corruption involving the president, and if the evidence is so overwhelming, it passes the Justice Committee and it passes it's enough to convince the Senate to convict the president, there is no other way, I think, to imagine a real shake-up of the system and believing that Philippine politics can be better. So for me right now, it's so emblematic, not just symbolic, the practical relevance of the president being impeached, then all the constitutionally and statutorily mandated bodies cracking down hard, investigating properly to prove innocent. I mean, if he's innocent, edi good. If not, then he's accountable. If we want change in the political system, I'd argue that is what will give the impulse for political change in the system. That will show the system can respond to the people. That will show the system, despite the awful personalistic politics of the Philippines, can be overcome by the system. That will show that, yes, there is hope. But on the other hand, if this weird, we don't know, we will know on Monday or Tuesday, if this weird stratagem that the absence of the SecGen and ministerially they can't receive the complaint, so a weak complaint is referred to the justice, immunizing the president for 1 year. If that's successful on Monday, that's awful because that shows a system is closing ranks, and then protecting the president. And that's the president indicating his control still, because of the pork in the 2026 budget, asserting his control over Congress, over the House of Representatives. And again, my last point, it's so cynical for the president who's shown, or well, who will be shown if the impeachment trial proceeds. The president, by his actions over the first 3 budgets, has shown the Marcos brand is equivalent to the worst corruption in Philippine history. The Marcos dictatorship, Guinness Book of World Records, so if that matters, that's a check. But the numbers show huge pork barrel, huge manipulation of funds, huge executive and legislative discretion over funds in the 2020-25 budget. Parang become full circle. So sana by February, the anniversary ng EDSA, we realize the Marcos brand is actually about the worst corruption in Philippine history. So, again, my frustration is this is a cynical manipulation by the government because they still control the budget, they still control so much of the House and the Senate. It's so cynical for them to throw us a few former senators, then maybe a couple of congressmen, representatives, or a few contractors, and then cynically wait until the next elections, because by the next elections, the pork barrel system will still be there. By the next elections, the dynasties will still be there. By the next elections, we will get the same outcomes we've been having for the last, 15, 16 elections since the dictatorship.
Thank you. Osby.
I was told not to frown, so.
Okay na. All right. So I'm sure there are other people in the audience that want to also ask questions. So let's proceed to open the forum. As stated before, if you want to ask a question, you can either write this down on the bottom of your program and pass the paper to one of our staff members, or you could come up to one of the microphones to your left and to your right. Okay, we have someone coming up to the mic. I know, he's not coming up to the mic. Okay. Did somebody, Sir Kulex from BUNYOGmaralita. Okay. Could you please state your name, organization?
Kulek Suliman po, Bunyog. Bueno, ano na ako magtatanong. Ito pong nangyaring flood control, talagang nagalit naman yung taong bayan. Kaya lang, ang tanong ko po ganito. Sa tingin ko po, parang may gap. Yung ginawang flood control corruption kasi, hindi lang siya political abuse. Economic abuse siya. Ayun, kanina doon sa sinasabi ni Director Sani, sa budget natin, 12 billion lang yung nilaan para sa national industrialization. Napakaliit. Samantalang yung importansya ng economic reform ay kasing halaga ng political reform. Kaya lang sa tingin parang may gap na yung galit ng taong bayan sa ating mga kumukontra dyan sa korupsyon, parang nadidiinan yung political reform, kaya yung mga congressman, karoon din sila ng pakonte-konte, kahit pa rin political, anti-political dynasty, transparent budget, pero hindi na-emphasize yung economic reform, kagaya halimbawa nung paglalaan, or pag-usapan natin yung national industrialization. Parang hindi na mainstream. Kasi lagi kami Yvonne, ganyan ang sinasabi, no? Napakahalaga pala. Kagaya ng reforma sa politika, reforma din sa ekonomiya. So paano po kaya natin i-address yung gap na yan sa ating public discourse?
Let's see that it's not becoming popular.
Okay. Wala tayo kasi ganitong technology, no? Wala naman kasi tayong industrialization. All right. Paano i-address? You know, galing ako sa talk for the Union of the Senate Employees. No? And the similar question, sabi niya, is there a development planning happening? Sabi ko, well, actually po, there's a renaming from NEDA to the Department of Development. No? Pero yun, kahit sa amin, that's cynicism because you've been there all along. Your mandate is to plan for development. Pero ito lang masasabi ko, i-search nyo ang word na national industrialization in the past or even present Philippine development plans and you will not find it. So practically, by development planning, the state has parang off the table na ang usapin ng pambansang industrialisasyon dahil ang kanyang paradigm naman is to attract foreign investments. So search nyo ulit ang foreign investment, foreign capital, market-oriented, whatever, and wow, ang daming matches. So I think it will start from a state that's really developing. That's really planning for development and planning for industrialization. That will be broad-based, no? Parang yung pinakita sa atin, will be based on agrarian reform, will take care of people's welfare and people's rights. Dapat may ganun munang plano. Before we can really increase the discourse in lawmaking, that there should really be allocation for such. Ang nakikita kasi natin, the budget reflects the direction. The budget is pro-elite, the budget is anti-development, it's so anti-poor. So yun ang budget natin for the last 40 years. And austerity, no? It's a very technical term. Austerity talaga tayo, which means it's a neoliberal dictate na ang ibig sabihin lang niya is medyo bawas-bawasan mo yung social services mo dahil magbabayad ka pa ng utang at magpapatayo ka pa no, ng mga magagandang kalsada at mga tulay para sa foreign business or para sa export processing zones. So, if we have that kind of paradigm, I mean, not we, but the state, the Philippine government, then yung magiging crumbs lang talaga yung mga allocation for MSMEs, or magiging soft pork nga sila in a sense Di ba? Kasi dinidisburse yan sa kanilang mga distrito. And yes, we will be trapped in that kind of underdevelopment. So yeah, that's my agitated answer.
Did you also want to respond, Sunny? Okay. So before we proceed with other next questions, I would like to first call to be as reactors to the inputs earlier from the UP Student Regent, Ron Dexter L. Clemente. Could you please stand up? And also the Public Relations Council of the UP Stat Student Council, Paul Samuel T. Manglindan. So this is okay. If we can have a microphone. Okay. Yes. Okay. Go ahead. What do you reckon? Sorry. Pwede actually, would you like to also come up para it won't be awkward to...
Hello.
Hello.
Ayan. Hello po. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat today. Ayan, muli, I am Dexter Clemente, the current student regent of the University of the Philippines system, no? And siguro in the discussion today reminds us of truth, no? That rapid economic growth does not mean progress for the Filipino people. Ayan, as Sir Sonny Africa clearly laid out earlier, no? The so-called growth of the economy is carried by household spending, no, not by the creation of decent, productive jobs. 2/3 of Filipino workers are trapped in low-paying service sector, while real production continues to decline. This explains why people are hungry, no? Hindi dahil tamad sila, hindi dahil ayaw nilang magtrabaho, but because the economy itself refuses to provide dignified work. So for the youth, no, hindi po ito isang abstract na economic problem lamang. This is the reality that we are being trained into. Because we are told that education is the great equalizer, quote-unquote, but equalizer for what future yung tanong. No, students graduate into contractual work, underemployment, or migration. No, education, it is reduced to producing workers for an economy that cannot even absorb them. No? So in this system, schooling becomes preparation not for national development, but for survival only. No? This is why the question of industrialization raised today is also a question of education. No country has developed without building its own productive capacity. No? And yet, our education system remains detached from genuine national development instead of strengthening Filipino science, no, technology, agriculture, manufacturing. Yung education system natin, it is currently aligned with foreign labor markets, no, and corporate demands. So what we are seeing currently is not simply an education crisis, no, kundi ay development crisis na nire-reflect inside our classrooms, inside our schools. No, so gaya din ng banggit ni Ma'am Rosario Guzman kanina no, sa discussion, yung political instability that we are experiencing today, no, the fractures within the ruling elite, no, yung collapse ng mga alliances, yung exposed corruption scandals dito sa Pilipinas, these are also not accidental. No, they are symptoms of a rotten system built on bureaucrat capitalism, as we have heard earlier, no, where public offices nagiging gateway siya para sa private accumulation. So corruption is not an exemption. It is also built into the budget. No, it requires approval from the highest officials in our country. No, and once again, education pa rin yung nagbabayad ng price nitong nangyayaring corruption na ito sa ating bansa. No, despite claims of increased education funding, true education budget, quote-unquote, remains a myth. No, so when enrollment is considered, yung mga inflation, ganyan, learning shortages, when all these things are considered, the increases do not translate to meaningful change. No, education continues to be treated as secondary behind infrastructure projects, debt servicing, and repression funding. No, para sa amin, mga kabataan, no, and mga scholar ng bayan, ito ay isang direct political message from the state. No, na ang aming kinabukasan is negotiable. No, our future is negotiable, but the interests of the elite are not. No, so this is why frustration alone is not enough. The youth are not merely observers of crisis. No, we are called pag-asa ng bayan for a reason. Pero as of now, para maging maisakatuparan natin yung pagiging pag-asa ng bayan ng mga kabataan, kailangan maging doers din tayo of the present. No, so ayun, muli maraming salamat po doon sa mga naibahagi ng ating speakers, no, at tuloy-tuloy ang laban ng mga kabataan at ng mga scholar ng bayan.
Thank you. Thank you to UP Student Regent Ron Dexter Clemente. For our next reactor, please welcome Public Relations Counselor of the UP Stat Student Council, Paul Samuel Mangad Lindan.
Okay. So muli, ako po si Paul Samuel Mangalindan, ang Public Relations Counselor ng UP Stat SC. So, ayan, in-invite ako for a reaction, tapos, ayun, bilang, estadistiko kami ng bayan, we're statisticians, this talk is very close to our hearts and very, awesome para pakinggan namin. And ayun, bilang scholar estadistiko ng bayan din, sobrang na-appreciate namin kasi ang hirap po magsaliksik at mag-search ng mga data para sa lumalalang political climate. And when we look back sa topic ni Sir Sonny, ayun, makikita natin yung sobrang detailed na data and nakakalungkot. Sobrang nakakalungkot na pabagsak yung bayan natin. But I want to re-emphasize yung part na disruptive yung nature ng national industrialization. And mas lalo na sa country natin. And ayun, it makes sense dahil hindi na nila tinatago yung pamamaraan nila sa pagprotekta ng status quo, which is yung pamamasista, yung fascism. So, kaya naman pinapasista kaming mga advocates, activists, mga kabataan, mga estudyante, at mas lalo na rin po yung sa sektor ng mga magsasaka na nagpapanawagan lamang ng kailangan at karapatan natin na academic freedom, karapatan sa edukasyon, genuine land reform, and national industrialization. Pero beyond that, pinapakita rin ng data na hindi na kaya ng system na suportahan yung bureaucrat capitalism na pinapamalas ng nasa state. And bumabagsak na itong mga tactics nila. At ayun, yung datos din, ginagabayan din nito tayo para sa tunay na democracy. And ayun, binibigyan din tayo ng boses ng data na tama yung pinaglalaban natin, guys. Hindi to gawa-gawa lang ng mga eksperto. At ayun, kahit gaano man kalakas yung pamamasista, ay hindi na po tayo kawalan dahil nasa atin na po yung data, nasa atin na po ang datos, at ito ang magiging armas natin sa paglaban para sa ating kinabukasan na para sa masa of people economics. At kaya naman po, malinaw rin po yung paninindigan ng aming konseho na sandigan ang datos na makamasa, tutulan ang pamamasista ng Estado at padagundungin ang mga panawagan na palayain ang mga bilanggong politikal na tumunggali lamang sa kapalpakan ng pamamalakad ng mga nagdaang rehimen at sa tumitinding pagbagsak ng ekonomiya. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Paul Samuel of the UP Student Council. I believe our spokes would like to react or comment in return to our reactors.
Sige, sorry, na-trigger ako. Reactions to reactors. I think what was mentioned about bureaucrat capitalism is so important. Also put it against the depressing point of the economy in decline, but actually the profits of a few. To be very specific, actually I'm going to circle back into the first question of Audrey about what hinders industrialization. Bureaucrat capitalism and the oligarchs and the billionaires hinder industrialization. Why? If anyone noticed one of the charts earlier, among the rapidly rising sectors is utilities. Where are the billionaires getting so much of their money right now? From privatized utilities, privatized water, privatized power, privatized transport. Why would someone making money from these industries, these sectors, be worried about national industrialization? Because part of national industrialization is stopping this stupid monopoly pricing of power and water and transport. Actually, it should mean nationalization of these critical sectors. So if you're a billionaire, having all these franchises and contracts, why would you risk losing your businesses in all the billions in profits because the Philippines has a national industrialization plan? So the point that the reactor said that I'm reacting to, I think bureaucrat capitalism has to be understood in that broader sense. But also, the downfall of the economy, so the decline of the economy is the decline of the people's conditions, but it's matched by an improvement in the wealth and riches and businesses of those close to power. And the disruption we need will disrupt their sources of wealth, disrupt the monopoly utilities they have. It will disrupt their cheap sources of capital. Diba? Imagine if you're Manny Villar, you want cheap loans, but because the government has industrialization plan, the cheap loans go to industry where you have no skill set, but your skill set is in real estate development. Suddenly, your capital costs increase. So across the board, if you look at one by one where billionaires and oligarchs make money, they make money at the expense of national industrialization. And if we believe in any way that they will use their political power to implement a policy of national industrialization, that will never happen because they will never undercut their own profits, their own sources of wealth. So I think, again, how do we fix that? Well, they should be the government. So the government shouldn't be equated to them. the Leninist state equates them. But if we believe in a government that can stand for something better for the majority, that government, with the push by the people, will be able to press for policies that aren't afraid to challenge the entrenched interests of bureaucrat capitalists. Ibang kwento pa yung how foreign investors, foreign creditors benefit from us and will disbenefit from industrialization. That's another thread, pero sana you at least get the drift. Yeah.
Did you also want to?
To react to the reactor, just like to thank our youth for naming it what it is, fascism. Kasi, I mean, we should talk about it. I mean, we're talking about bureaucratic capitalism, and it's coming. It's also coming from the two other evils, right? Imperialism and political dynasties making use of feudalism and all that. But the youth named it as it is. Huh? It's fascism. Whatever is arising, whatever kind of repression is arising from bureaucrat capitalism, as we are witnessing it now, ay pasismo. Pasismo yan ng Estado. Well, before we were saying neoliberalism is fascism in disguise, but now it's not in disguise. It's very out in the open. So parang ganun lang. I mean, I was watching the parang indignation rally yesterday for Frenchie May, the conviction of Frenchie May and Tacloban 5. And then this youth leader was saying that magrevolusyon tayo o hindi, karahasan pa rin ang inihaharap sa atin. Diba? So I think